ago, one of the Texas news networks decided to follow a family from North Texas as they prepared to attend the execution of a man who had brutally killed 2 of their children. The murder had happened during a robbery attempt at a small mom-and-pop grocery store. Some of you may remember it. The children had been murdered in cold blood as their parents witnessed such brutality. There was no way to soften the horror of the man's acts. After he had been arrested, the family attended the trial and acted as witnesses to the crime. The jury had found him guilty of capital murder and sentenced the man to death by lethal injection. The mother who testified stated that the man who had killed her children had shown no feelings toward her children as he gunned them down. She said he did not care. The remainder of the expose was to follow the family members as they prepared for the day of the execution. There was an anxious moment when one carload of the family got stuck in traffic. They were concerned that they would not get to the death house in Huntsville in time, but all arrived in plenty of time to see the execution. In the state of Texas, family members of a murder victim have the right to witness the execution of an accused, and they had chosen to exercise their rights. After the execution, as the family left the prison gates, they were interviewed by the news media once more. The mother was asked how she felt about the man who was executed. She stated that she had no feelings towards the man at all when he was finally injected with the drugs that would put him in eternal sleep. As I watched, it struck me how the mother had used the same words to describe her feelings while watching him die that she had used to describe the murderer's feelings as he watched her children die. I wondered if she knew how angry she was. I did know that this family was not ready to forgive. A year later, they interviewed the family again. Again, I was aware of the mother's hatred and anger. The problem was that it was spilling out towards others. No healing had come to the family. None at that time, anyway. When Peter asked Jesus if 7 times is enough to forgive another, he believed that he was being gracious. In Hebrew law, you were only required to forgive 3 times. Peter is no doubt surprised when Jesus responds with 77 times. That's a lot of times. Much greater than anyone would believe would be necessary. And then Jesus tells us this parable that illustrates the nature of forgiveness. The Lord decides to do inventory of his estate and realizes that one of his slaves owes him 10,000 talents, a great deal of money. According to my Bible commentary, a talent was worth 15 years of wages. That's 15,000 years of wages. I'm sure that the Lord was wondering how he even had given so much to this one man, not to notice how in debt he had become. There is no way the man would ever repay what he owed to the Lord, so he falls on his knees and begs for his life. Have patience with me. I will pay you everything. Did he really believe that he had the ability to repay all that debt? The reality is that the slave would never be able to repay what he owed, and the Lord knew it, so the Lord released him from his debt and forgave him. The Lord had released him from the burden of repaying a debt he would never be able to repay in the first place. That must have been a great relief to the slave. He must have felt good about himself and the world at that time. But this same slave leaves the presence of the Lord and sees another slave who owes him 100 denarii, a denarii being equivalent to a day's wages. It's still a great deal of money, but minuscule in comparison to the debt owed by the first slave. And what does he do? Instead of releasing the second man from his debt, he demands payment. He doesn't get it, does he? You are to forgive as you have been forgiven. How can you receive such a wonderful gift and not pass it on? The parable illustrates to us the message of forgiveness. We owe our lives to God. We are in debt to him, and he does not demand payment. He forgives our sins, our debts, and he gives us abundant life. But it is clear, in order to receive this forgiveness, we are to forgive others. As human beings, this does not come to us naturally. For the parents whose children were killed brutally before them, they cannot forgive the murderer. The victims of 9/11, forgiving Al-Qaeda is impossible. And for those of us who have been harmed and hurt, forgiveness is the hardest thing from our mind. Yet we are to forgive as we have been forgiven. So how is this done? In a book entitled The Spirituality of Imperfection, Storytelling and the Journey to Wholeness, Ernest Kurtz and Catherine Ketchum devoted an entire chapter to forgiveness. In their look at Alcoholics Anonymous, they discovered that the more people were forced to forgive, the more resentment they felt. The harder they tried to be nice, the more hard-hearted they felt. They discovered that forgiveness was beyond their control, that it belonged to the spiritual realm. It was not a matter of will. They continued by saying that progress ensued only when they remained open and honest about their feelings. But when they were willing to have their resentment taken away by a higher power, they saw progress. When they recognized themselves as having been forgiven, they became willing to let go of the self as victim and give the pain to God. The authors concluded that the ability to forgive others was preceded by the understanding of oneself having been forgiven. Forgiveness is a gift to us, just like grace is offered by God. But it has to be received. Forgiveness happens when we are willing to receive it. Let me step back a minute because I want to make clear that I'm not saying that we are to forgive and not forget. Jesus tells Peter to forgive 77 times because when we find ourselves taking back our forgiveness, we have to forgive over and over again. It doesn't mean we let someone get away with murder. It means we let go of the pain and resentment and let Jesus Christ carry it for us to the cross. Forgiveness doesn't mean you don't have to live with the consequences of your behavior. It just means that you get to live a life, the rest of your life, without the burden of being unforgiven. It also means that for those who forgive get to live the rest of their life without the burden of carrying their hurt and resentment. As a therapist, I have seen those two feelings eat away at a person's soul until they are no longer a person, but an angry animal. Forgiveness means knowing that we don't have to spend eternity trying to pay for a debt that will never be repaid. Forgiveness means we can continue to live in community with one another. In reality, forgiveness is something we cannot do on our own. In order for us to forgive from our hearts, as Christ commands us to do, we first have to receive the forgiveness that comes from the grace of God. It is not a matter of will, but of willingness. It's not cheap. It was bought for us to the person of Jesus Christ, who suffered for us on the cross, who said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Who teaches us to say, "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." When we receive the love of God, when we can confess our sins, known and unknown, things done and left undone, when we can understand that we are all sinners, and that we are loved in spite of our imperfections, then we have within our grasp the ability to forgive others from our heart. Amen.